Most people think they know what a real haunting looks like. A few bumps in the night, cold spots, maybe a shadow creeping across the wall. But sometimes, what's hiding just beyond the light is far darker. These are two reportedly true haunting stories. One became one of the most violent poltergeist cases ever documented, with chilling paranormal evidence captured by investigators. The other spiraled into a terrifying battle of alleged demonic possession. Welcome to the world of real hauntings, violent poltergeists, paranormal investigations, and demonic oppression. Our first story is a reportedly true account of a poltergeist haunting that occurred in South Shields, England. The terror began in December 2005 for Marianne, Mark, and their 3-year-old son, Robert. At first, the activity seemed minor, the kind of strange events often whispered about in true haunting accounts. They reportedly heard unexplained sounds, faint whispers in the dark, and noticed everyday items turning up in the wrong place. It all seemed harmless enough, until it wasn't. According to the family, the poltergeist activity escalated quickly. Objects were allegedly seen sliding across rooms entirely on their own. Doors creaked open, slowly and deliberately, before slamming shut with enough force to rattle the walls. Heavy banging noises echoed from empty upstairs rooms. Then, one morning, Mark and Marianne walked in the kitchen and saw something that stopped them in their tracks. The chairs had been stacked on the top of the kitchen table, and they were balanced at impossible angles. They felt this was a clear and chilling display of power by the entity, and maybe even a warning. Marianne and Mark began noticing their young son talking to someone when no one else was in the room. At first they thought it was just a child's imagination, an imaginary friend. But then he gave them a name. He called them the People. He said they were always there, standing in the corners, moving through the hallways, and watching from behind the furniture. He would point to empty spaces and describe them, tall, shadowy, with faces that blurred if you stared too long. In spring 2006, Mark allegedly noticed that a heavy chest of drawers had been moved from the bedroom and was now balanced dangerously at the edge of the top of the stairs. It was tilted just enough that a single bump could have sent it crashing down with deadly force. There were no scuff marks on the floor, no drag lines, no explanation for how something that heavy had gotten there without making a sound. Mark said he felt that this was a calculated and deliberate move by the poltergeist, letting the family know that it could harm them anytime it wanted. The poltergeist activity grew more aggressive. Objects were said to fly through the air with dangerous force. Loud crashes woke the family in the middle of the night, and shadows darted just beyond their vision, always gone by the time they turned to look. The air inside the house grew heavier, thicker, almost like it was pressing down on them. Then came the night they would never forget. Mark and Marianne had just climbed into bed, but the moment they pulled the covers over themselves, the temperature dropped. It was as if all the warmth had been sucked out of the room. Then, one of Robert's stuffed animals launched across the room and struck Marianne in the head. She barely had time to react before another one flew and hit her. Mark pulled the blankets up over their heads to avoid the toys, but it was yanked away by the poltergeist. They found themselves locked in a chilling tug of war with something they couldn't see, but that clearly wanted them to fear it. Terrified, the family reached out for help. Paranormal investigator Darren W. Ritson answered the call. After several conversations, Darren decided that he needed to witness the activity firsthand. He brought along a fellow investigator named Mike Hallowell, who admitted that the family's claims sounded too good to be true, but he agreed to investigate. When they arrived, nothing happened for nearly 4 hours. Then, apparently the violent poltergeist made its move. While they were standing inside Robert's bedroom, a yellow plastic nut sitting on his toy workbench lifted into the air, hovering briefly, and then shot across the room. It struck the wall and then bounced off, striking Marianne in the back. Moments later, another toy slid off a shelf and dropped to the floor, and a rubber ball appeared on the bed. When Darren picked it up, he said it was warm, almost hot to the touch. Recording equipment was set up, and according to the investigators, they captured a wealth of paranormal evidence, including unexplained footsteps, knocking sounds, creaks, and a strange bleeping noise that no one could identify. As the weeks passed, the poltergeist activity intensified. Robert's chalkboard apparently turned into a disturbing message board. The family would find chilling words written on it, such as "Get out," "R.I.P.," and "Die." And then the physical attacks got worse. Mark was reportedly jolted awake in the middle of the night with a searing pain across his chest. It was hot, like something was burning him from the inside out. He threw back the covers and stumbled to turn on the light. There were dozens of red welts and raised lines scrawled across his torso in jagged patterns. Marianne gasped, but before either of them could move, the worst part began. Right there, in front of their eyes, new marks began to form. Long, deep scratches carving themselves into Mark's skin, one after another, as though invisible claws were raking across his body. The haunting continued, and it was draining them emotionally, physically, and mentally, leaving them feeling exhausted and more vulnerable than ever. Then, one night, Mark said he saw something that froze him in place. A tall, dark shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. It was motionless and standing right outside Robert's bedroom door. Mark said it was solid, nearly 6 feet tall, and completely black. It didn't have any eyes or a face. It was completely featureless. The figure turned its head in one slow, deliberate movement, so it was pointed directly at Mark. He said that it felt as if the entity was looking through him, peeling him open with its stare, searching his thoughts and digging into his soul. And then it disappeared. Mark didn't know if it had left or if it had simply stepped back into the darkness. One of the most bizarre and chilling incidents occurred when the poltergeist began to manipulate phones. It happened one evening while Marianne, Mark, Darren, and Mike sat around the kitchen table, trying to make sense of the growing terror. Marianne's phone buzzed. She looked down and was stunned to see a text message from Mark's phone, since his phone was tucked safely in his pocket. The first message read hi. She stared at it confused, and then another message followed, hello, and then a third, sorry. Mark immediately pulled his phone out, and he removed the battery and the SIM card and then tossed the phone on the table. But the messages didn't stop, and they took on a darker tone, telling Marianne things like, you can't escape. Even if you leave, I'll follow you. Even more terrifying was that the text swore at her, calling her disturbing and demeaning names. The family lived with the poltergeist, doing their best to make it through each day. Then, after a while, like what reportedly happens in many poltergeist cases, the haunting began to burn itself out until it stopped altogether. What made the South Shields poltergeist case stand out was the sheer amount of paranormal evidence allegedly gathered. According to the paranormal investigators, at least 17 independent witnesses signed sworn statements telling of the supernatural things they saw. The investigators also say they took hundreds of photographs that captured the haunting, including objects in mid-flight and even Mark's fresh scratch wounds appearing in real time. They supposedly also have hours of video and audio recordings documenting paranormal activity and strange, unexplained sounds echoing through the house, though this evidence has never been made public. If the reports are true, then this may be one of the most thoroughly documented real-life haunting stories ever recorded. As terrifying as the South Shields poltergeist was, things could have been much worse, because sometimes, according to those who have lived through it, the darkness doesn't just haunt a house, it follows you, it wears you down, and slowly it tries to take control. Our next story dives even deeper into the paranormal, going into the terrifying realm of demonic oppression and spiritual possession. This is the reportedly true haunting of the Union Screaming House. Stephen never planned to walk into a nightmare. After his divorce, all he wanted was a quiet place to raise his 3 kids, Lydia, Matthew, and Michael. But the home he found would soon become known as the Union Screaming House, the location of one of the world's most terrifying real-life hauntings. At first, everything seemed normal. But then, strange and unexplained events began to unfold. Stephen said a picture of an angel that his daughter hung on the wall kept falling no matter how securely Stephen tried to attach it to the wall. And locals avoided walking directly in front of the house, choosing to cross the street instead. Also, evidently the family heard shuffling footsteps echoing through empty rooms upstairs. But these were just the early warning signs of something much darker. Everything changed the day Stephen sent his son Michael down to the basement to grab a hose. Moments later, Michael's terrified screams tore through the house. Stephen rushed in and found him standing frozen in the kitchen. His eyes were wide with a fear that Stephen had never seen before. He was pale, and his lips trembled as he pointed a shaking finger at the basement door, saying the word monster over and over again. Stephen searched the basement but found nothing out of the ordinary. Still, he couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something evil was already living there and that it was watching them. According to Stephen, this was the beginning of a demonic haunting. One afternoon, while playing board games with his kids, Stephen thought he saw something moving out of the corner of his eye near the kitchen. When he turned to look, he said he saw a swirling, smoke-like figure moving towards him. But as soon as it got close, it vanished. Not wanting to scare the kids, he found an excuse to end the game they were playing and led them outside to the car. But as they pulled away from the house, they all said they heard a loud scream coming from inside it. Michael looked up at the house and whispered, "Dad, the monster's in the window." Stephen claimed he looked and saw the same dark shape that he saw in the kitchen appear in the upstairs window, watching them as they left. Determined not to let fear drive them out of their home, Stephen brought the kids back to the house. But according to his account, an oppressive energy wrapped around them the moment they stepped back inside. Reportedly, the air grew cold and heavy, and a foul stench filled the house. It was such a bad smell, it made Stephen gag. Later, while his boys were upstairs playing, Stephen said he felt an electric jolt surge through his body. He immediately thought of the boys and rushed upstairs to their room. He grabbed the bedroom doorknob and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if something on the other side was holding it shut. Then, out of nowhere, the door slowly creaked open. Inside the room were his sons, both huddled in the corner and crying out for help. Stephen scooped them up and then yelled for his daughter to join them in the upstairs hall. Together, they ran downstairs, but as they were fleeing, Stephen said that he saw the dark figure again. This time, it was following them through the house, but Stephen was able to get them out of there and into the car safely. He eventually moved his family out of that house and into a new home, believing that they would finally be free from the entity and the paranormal activity. But not too long after moving into the new home, there was a night that Stephen felt as if someone was standing outside his bedroom window. He couldn't shake the uncomfortable sensation, so he finally yanked the curtains open and claimed that he saw a shadowy figure standing in the yard. Its eyes were glowing pale white, and as it crept closer, he said its mouth twisted into a wide, unnatural grin. Then it pressed his face to the window, and the glass shattered. The next thing Stephen knew was that he was on the floor, and his daughter was shaking him awake. The window wasn't broken, everything was quiet, but Stephen wasn't sure if it had been a dream or a warning from the entity that had been tormenting them in the Union House. While researching other real-life paranormal cases, trying to find answers to his own, Stephen connected with a paranormal investigator named Sheila. He was surprised to find out that she knew all about the Union House. Sheila told him that the new tenants of the house, specifically a woman named Helen, had been experiencing a menacing haunting. Helen lived there with her husband, who didn't believe anything Helen was saying about the house being haunted, along with her daughter and young grandson, and she was barely holding it together. She said the activity inside the house was growing worse with each passing day. She described hearing heavy breathing close to her ear when no one was there, unexplained footsteps in the halls, and finding her kitten dead, its body twisted in an unnatural angle. Even more troubling is that she said her young grandson had been shoved down the stairs by something, but luckily he wasn't injured. Though Stephen never imagined that he'd be going back to the Union House, and he definitely did not want to face whatever entity was haunting it again, he knew he could not turn his back on Helen and her family. With Helen's approval, Stephen arranged for a psychic named Betty to investigate the Union House. The moment she stepped onto the porch, she felt a heavy, dark energy that seeped from the home. And as she walked through the front door, there was no doubt that whatever was inside didn't want her there. Betty took a moment to herself and then asked Stephen to walk her through the house so she could get a feel for it. While they were walking along the upstairs hallway, Helen and Stephen reportedly felt a chill pass through them and then watched in horror as Betty was lifted off the ground and slammed against the wall by something they couldn't see. Betty stood up almost immediately. After catching her breath, she pressed on, refusing to give in to the evil inside of the house. Eventually, she made her way into the basement, a place that felt different the moment she stepped onto the stairs. The air grew heavier with each step, like it was pressing in from all sides. The walls seemed to close in tighter the deeper she went, and the silence down there felt alive. She knew something was watching them. She slowly stepped across the basement floor and then stopped. Without a word, she pointed to a spot on the concrete and stared. Then, with a low voice, she told Stephen there was a vortex right there, a rip between worlds where something dark had forced its way through. Her advice to Helen was simple and chilling. Leave the house immediately. But Helen couldn't leave. Her husband still refused to believe anything she told him about the haunting, brushing it off as stress or her imagination. So she stayed, trapped inside a house that no longer felt like a home, forced to endure the evil that was now part of her life. At night, she said she'd wake up frozen in bed, paralyzed by a heavy presence of something standing over her, breathing just inches from her face. The air would grow thick with the stench of rot, so foul that it made her eyes water and her stomach turn. And then came the figure, a tall, black-hooded presence that appeared more and more often. Sometimes it stood in the doorway, just watching. Other times it sat beside her bed, unmoving. And some nights it would crawl onto her chest and pin her down, stealing the breath from her lungs while she lay there, helpless. Her behavior reportedly changed in deeply disturbing ways. She became paranoid, distant, and was convinced her husband was hiding things from her and lying to her. She even accused him of cheating. But what she admitted to Stephen shook him to the core. Helen said she had started having violent thoughts, more like urges that were dark, intrusive, and constant. She said it felt like something was whispering to her, feeding her anger and twisting it into something violent. Then came the breaking point. She told Stephen that one morning she grabbed a kitchen knife, then went to her car. She slid the knife beside her seat. She said she wasn't sure why she brought it, only that a voice inside her told her it was necessary. She drove to her husband's work, then called him to come out, saying that she wanted to take him to lunch. He got in, shut the door, and reached for his seatbelt. According to Helen, something inside her snapped. She grabbed the knife and lunged, swinging it at her husband. He saw it just in time, and in a blur of movement, he grabbed her wrist. She said her body fought back, but part of her mind was still awake, buried beneath a wall, watching in horror as she tried to hurt the man she loved. Her husband shoved open the passenger door, rolled out of the car, and ran back into the building. Helen sat there, knife still in hand, breathing hard. Then she drove home. Stephen listened and was frozen in disbelief. The kind, caring woman that he once knew was vanishing, and whatever had taken root inside her was now in control. He believed that Helen wasn't only under demonic attack, but she may be suffering from full-blown demonic possession. Stephen had trouble sleeping after that conversation. The image of Helen gripping that knife, her eyes locked on her husband in an evil glare, it haunted him, and he knew she needed help fast. He called a local priest, desperate for guidance. When the priest agreed to visit the Union House, Stephen felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this could drive the darkness out. Stephen joined Helen at her house, and when they heard the priest's car pull into the driveway, they opened their front door to greet him. Stephen saw the priest's hesitation immediately. As the man walked onto the front porch, he froze. His eyes locked on the house as he took a deep, long breath. From that moment on, the priest never stopped looking over his shoulder. But he entered the home and began his blessing of the house. His hands trembled as he clutched the holy water. The prayers came quickly, mumbled under his breath. He moved from room to room like he was being hunted, eyes darting to the corners as if something might lunge out at any moment. When he reached the basement door, he stopped, slowly reached out to the knob, touched it, and then pulled his hand back as if avoiding a dog's bite. His face went pale. He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked away to another room. He finished the blessing in a rush and left without offering comfort, warning, or an explanation. Minutes after the priest left, Stephen said the house exploded with loud crashes and banging from every direction. It was as if the entity inside the house was furious that the priest had been in the home. The spiritual warfare had begun, and Helen was losing. Stephen watched helplessly as Helen's condition spiraled down. She was slipping further away. Her voice was more hollow. Her eyes were more distant. It was like something inside her was slowly being replaced. Then, one night his phone rang. It was Helen, breathless and trembling. She said that she had just woken up mid-conversation with a black hooded figure. She couldn't remember what she said, but she knew that she had agreed to something. And whatever it was, she said it felt like she made a deal. From that night on, Helen reported that the figure returned every night. And then something new appeared. She told Stephen that a massive black dog had begun to manifest in her bathroom. It stood taller than any real dog, its body thick and unnatural, almost distorted like a shadow stretched too far. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow and it never moved. It just stood there, staring. She finally told Stephen what he feared the most, that she believed it was already over, that whatever had invaded her home had won. A night not too long after that, Stephen was home watching TV when he heard a violent banging on his door. A voice that he didn't recognize was screaming for him to open it. He ran over to the front window and looked out. He was shocked when he saw Helen. She was hammering the door with the side of her fist, then with her forehead, over and over again. Though he knew she needed help, he also knew that, though it may look like Helen outside, something else was in control of her, and that if he let her in, something terrible might happen. So he told her to go home. After several agonizing minutes of her screaming and banging, and Stephen continuing to say no, she turned around and walked away, her head down, shoulders slumped, vanishing into the shadows of the night. He called Helen's daughter, telling her what just happened, and he asked her to go drive by her mother's house to see if she made it home safely. Minutes later, she called him back, her voice shaking. She was in the driveway, watching her mother sit on the front porch, holding a gun in her hands. Stephen realized that Helen most likely had that gun with her when she was trying to get into his house, and it sent shivers down his spine. He told the daughter that he would call Helen and try to talk some sense into her. The phone rang several times before a guttural voice answered it. As Stephen talked to her, Helen's actual voice would come and go until finally it was only her voice talking. She was back, at least for now. Helen's daughter brought her mother to the car, and before they hung up, he heard Helen tell her daughter, "Tell Stephen to get me a priest." Helen's daughter brought her to the hospital, where she was quickly admitted. Doctors ran tests, asked questions, and observed her closely, but they found no signs of mental illness. Still, they all agreed on one thing: Helen needed serious help. Stephen, desperate for answers beyond what medicine could offer, reached out to a new priest named Father Paul. Father Paul agreed to visit Helen in the hospital, but what he encountered left him shaken. He later told Stephen that on some days, Helen wouldn't speak at all. She just stared at the ceiling. On other days, something else spoke through her. The voice would change, lower and crueler, taunting him and mocking his prayers that he whispered at her bedside. While Father Paul fought for her soul, Helen was also receiving psychiatric care, and slowly it started to work. Over the next several weeks, with constant counseling, prayer, and unwavering support, Helen began to show signs of life again. Her eyes cleared, her voice steadied, and the dark episodes became less frequent. And then one day, they simply stopped. And for the first time in a long time, Helen felt peace. She never stepped foot in the Union House again. And as for Stephen, he was never the same. What he witnessed inside the house and what he watched happen to Helen changed him forever. He formed his own paranormal investigation team and now shares Helen's story and his own with others who are facing the same kind of darkness. The Union House was more than just a haunted house. According to those involved, it was a battle of spiritual warfare. It's a terrifying example of real-life demonic possession that nearly cost one woman her soul. Have you heard of either of these true hauntings before? Do you believe in poltergeist or demonic possession? Let me know in the comments. And, as always, thanks for watching Stories Beyond the Ordinary.